Sometimes, or even many times, we play games for escapism. We explore strange new worlds, so we slay dragons and loot their treasure. And other times, we play games to understand and explore history. And if you know the number of Circle War games that I played and reviewed, then you know that I definitely enjoyed that. Because games give me a unique way of seeing history. Different from reading a book or watching a movie, games are interactive. I make decisions. I see the mechanisms. I see the dynamic elements. I see what happened and what could have happened in a way that other media just don't let me see. Votes for Women is a game of this kind that allows you to explore history and to see what happened and what could have happened, and puts you in the place, in the role of the protagonist. It's a two-player, or I should say two-side game. We're going to have the opposition and the suffragists. Again, ideally two players, but you could have multiple players, of course, teaming up on either side. The game also comes with an Autobot in case no one in your groups wants to play the patriarchal forces opposing votes for women. Then you got a deck of cards and a specific set of dice to regulate the actions of the opposition. So two sides, and again, potentially two players. The game shows you the states in which the suffragists are trying to have the 19th Amendment ratified. But first, of course, you also need to have Congress pass it. So that's what the suffragist side is trying to do. First, to pass the 19th Amendment in Congress, and to track their progress, they will need to use game effects to place these tokens here, while the opposition is trying to remove them. Booyah. If this ever happens, so there are 6 tokens like that in that space of the board, then you can remove that, because that part of the game is over, the part about getting thing passed in Congress. Now the amendment needs to be ratified by the states, and now we will pay particular attention to the board. Well, we'll pay attention to the board during the entire game. Now, as you can see, the board shows you the states, and there are cubes there indicating where the general opinion is going. There can only be one kind of cube, either the opposition, which is red, or suffragist cubes, which are yellow and purple. They're equivalent in terms of recording support. These 2 cubes are in a state. That's 2 points of support for the suffragists. But there may be different game effects that target one or the other. And that also is a way of representing the variety of forces that are at play there. If a state has 4 cubes, so one kind or the other, when Congress passes the 19th Amendment, then the state is locked. If it has 4 cubes of the opposition, it is locked against votes for women for the rest of the game. If it has 4 cubes on the suffragist forces, it has passed the 19th Amendment and now is locked that way for the rest of the game. If the suffragists manage to have the amendment passed in Congress and ratified by 13 states on the board, they win the game. If the opposition prevents the amendment from being passed in Congress by the end of turn 6, or has 13 states basically not ratifying it, 13 states, then the opposition wins the game. It may be that you get to the end of turn 6 and none of those conditions have applied. The amendment has passed in Congress, but one side doesn't have 36, the other one doesn't have 13. Then you have a special mini game, which is the final vote, in which, yes, we're going to roll dice, but to see basically for each state who rolls the most, but the number of cubes that are there for one side will count as positive modifiers for that side. So, for example, the suffragists have rolled a 4 there, and the opposition a 1. So in the final voting that would go to the suffragists. So it's rolling dice, but it's not completely random because the effect of cube placement in the previous phase matters. Other things matter because we also have tokens that players will collect and spend during the game. Of course, there's some for the anti-suffrage and some for the suffragist movement, and you can spend tokens to gain rerolls. So that's also important. During the final voting, by default, ties go to the opposition unless certain effects are in play. Then they will give ties to the suffragists. So it's dice based, but there are a lot of elements that mitigate randomness. And what I'm showing you here, by the way, is the situation at first once the players have played their starting cards. So as you can see, there are a lot of cubes of the opposition on this side of the board, undecided areas on this side of the board, and 2 campaigners for the suffragists there. In New York, each has placed a cube there. Actually, after the opposition places their card, their thing, that would remove. They would have removed one of those. Because the idea is always that if you place cubes in an area that doesn't have cubes of the opponent, well, go ahead. If you place cubes in an area that the opponent has, well, first you use your cubes to remove those of the opponent, then you place the remaining ones. That's what happened if the suffragists are placing 3 cubes in Texas right now. These eliminate each other, and that's what's left. So that's how we start. The campaigners, the opposition starts with 1 on the board, and the suffragists with 2, and there may be game effects that will be placing more of these campaigners. So we have 6 turns. Each player has their own deck. Each deck is split into 3 eras: the late, the middle, and the early. You shuffle each separately, place them one on top of the other, so that although they're randomized, you still have a general overarching representation of the main historical events of this period. And so each player will have their own hand of 7 cards. So once in turn 1 starting card, and then 6 that you draw. You will play 6 during a turn, so you'll be left with 1. You'll draw 6 more, and you'll start next turn again with a hand of 7. Each turn, starting from the second, players will have a little auction, and they will bid for 3 strategy cards, for 1 of 3 strategy cards available. They will bid for the right to take one of these cards. They can have pretty good game effects. When you acquire one and then you play it, you simply do what it says. And the currency, when you're bidding for that, is these tokens here. As you can see, there are different tokens just for historical flavor, but still 2 sides, for or against votes for women. So after that little bid, you're going to have the main phase in which players will play card and trigger different effects. One last concept before we get to the main thing. That last concept is state cards. There will be a number of state cards available representing states of great interest: Montana, California, Texas, Georgia, for example. They have powerful effects, and you acquire them if you are the first player to place 4 cubes in a state that has one of those cards still available. That happens, and they're the first player to have 4 cubes. Then they acquire this card, and this card, now it's in their hand. It can be played for the effect indicated there. So that's a non-replenishable. Well, it's a resource that once it's gone, is gone. So players will want to go for those states as soon as possible because those effects, again, are pretty good. During your turn, you will play a card from hand, plus possibly a strategy card if you have one, plus possibly a state card if you have one, but you can only play one of those per turn, like not a ton of states, not a ton of strategy cards. When you're playing a card, you can play for its written event. Then you simply do what it says. Some will require rolling dice, like this one is rolling a d8. We got d8s, d6s, And D4s, yes, these are the right kind of D4, meaning 12-sided dice, not those depressing and frankly dangerous pyramids that sometimes are sold as D4s. For example, here I roll a D8, I add that number of suffragist cubes. It means I can choose any combination of purple and or yellow. In the Plains region, no more than one per state. That's what it does. So that's pretty simple, meaning you do what it says, receive a token and add a cube in one state of each region. As you can see, we got different regions, and so on and so forth. However, you can also use your cubes, you can also use your cards for other things. So you can simply play, discard it, ignoring the event. For example, for a card, I can discard a card and gain one of these tokens, which again can be used for bidding, for re-rolling, for other kinds of effects. I can discard a card for campaigning, in which case I will roll a d4 for each campaigner that I have. The suffragists have 2 at the beginning, at the beginning of the game, and the opposition has 1. I roll the dice. I can choose to spend a token to reroll them. Much better, 3 and 3. Then I can assign them to my campaigners. I can also spend, again, these tokens, they're good for so many things, to move my suffragist. And then I simply place the number of cubes associated with the suffragists in the region where I am. And so, for example, I just moved the suffragist. There is the purple suffragist. She has 3 purple cubes as indicated by the die roll. And I decide to spend 1 here to remove that one. And I add another one there. So 1 is just to remove the opposition. And then like that. Or I spend 1 to remove the opposition, 1 to go there, and another cube notionally to remove another opposition here. So that's how campaigning works. You remove enemy cubes and or place yours. And here, that one will place 3 in New York, because she really wants to have 4 there already. Booyah. Like that, for example. What else can you do with your cards? You can lobby. That is when you try to manipulate the number of these tokens that go to Congress. You will roll a d6 for each campaigner that you have. So at the beginning of the game, 1 for the opposition, 2 for the suffragists. And you roll, and for each 6 that you get, you will get to place a token in Congress if you are the suffragists, or you'll get to remove one from Congress. So 1 in 6 is not super exciting. Probably you will want it, when possible, as a suffragist especially, to use game effects, to use event cards, to wait until you have more suffragists, more campaigners, and again, you may want to have a nice storage of reroll tokens, so that that would be great lobbying. But again, you gotta build up to that. So these are the main things that you can do with your cards. Play them for an event, play them to place cubes on the board, play them to collect tokens. You discard a card to collect a token, play them to lobby. Continue like this for 6 card plays per player per turn. Then you go to the next turn, when again you will have an auction for the strategy cards, and then you'll be playing cards for all these things. Again, ideally, the suffragist player will get the amendment passed in Congress and then ratified by 36 states. The opposition doesn't want that, and so you continue until either the suffragists have failed to pass the amendment in Congress by the end of turn 6, they lose the game, or amendment being passed, one side has 36 in favor, or the other side has 13 against, or at the end of turn 6, final vote minigame, and in that case then you decide who wins the game, again by 36 in favor or 18 or 13 against. This is how you play the game, but before we move on to the conclusions, I also want to point out that the game comes with a nice stack of reproduction of historical artifacts. And you got the letters, you got documents, you got newspapers clipping. Again, this is a game that clearly has a strong political and pedagogical element. It wants you to become more curious about the movement. Possibly, maybe again, you'll play the game with the younger generations as a teacher. This is a game that you could definitely use in the classroom. And again, also because no one has to be the opposition, so all the students can be on the side of equality and rights for women. But definitely, this is remarkable that they included these elements that again I can see they could really work well with younger players and or in the classroom. Votes for Women is a remarkable game. Everything about it is just excellent. Production-wise, you have all of those extra elements that really look nice, and the elements that you use to play the game also very nice, very functional. Yeah, some of the states are a little small, but that's not the designer's fault. That's what you're gonna have. And even with those boxes, sometimes you have to check. Sure, which state is this one exactly? Scott, you're gonna review American geography. The cards are amazing, the rules are very good, everything from the point of view of production presentation is excellent. The topic is very relevant. That is one that, of course, is always important to learn as much as we can about it, because equality is still an unfinished process, and this was a step along the way, which in itself, again, is presented as a long process. I myself had the idea that somehow it was around the time when the 19th Amendment was passed and most of the work was happening, but it was really important and interesting to see all of the factors that played leading to that event over decades, and all the back and forth. It's the famous idea of like one step forward, two steps backwards, and yet somehow you're making some progress. And the American Civil War happens, and now there's a backlash in the South. Other things happen somewhere else, and that opens opportunities and causes obstacles. So definitely, we know by now that card-driven is an excellent mechanic to represent historical fact in a way that feels overall relevant while still also giving you a lot of options. Yeah, sometimes you get a card that is about the end of the Civil War before somebody plays the American Civil War. But the overall span, the overall historical narrative is there. But again, in a way that doesn't feel scripted, because players can still make decisions at each and every turn, which is the reason to start with why we play games, to make interesting decisions. If I just want to learn about this topic, then I can pick up a book. I'm sure there are documentaries. But the idea of being an active participant in the shaping of these events through the interface of the game, that is something that, of course, is a great opportunity, and I think this game does that really well. It shows you the mechanics and dynamics of history in an interactive and engaging way, and that, to me, that's amazing. And again, to the point that you could use it in the classroom, you could use it as a teaching aid. And for that, it's a good thing that you do not have to play the side of patriarchal oppression if you don't want to, but you can, because you got the upper butt. Incidentally, I played the game solo only, and I tried both versions. The games can be played solo these days, which is true solo using the upper button, and then two-handed controlling both sides. Personally, I prefer that version because I like to make decisions, and so now I'm making full decisions when I mentally switch perspective from the side of votes for women to the side of opposition. But again, if I were to use this in the classroom, then we use the upper button, and it's just easier that way. Gameplay itself is very tense because, especially for the side of the suffragists, because they have a difficult challenge there. There are just so many trade-offs that they have to work with. You spend a lot of time building your support across all of the states, then Congress never passes the amendments. So what is the point? You spend a lot of time lobbying in Congress. You forget the fact that people across the country will need to have a saying in that. Then you're in trouble there. Definitely asymmetrical and highly so, because the suffragist side has a lot of boxes that they need to check, and it can be done in different ways, while the opposition has possibly an easier task. In any case, I would say a more straightforward. It is a more forgiving side. And yet, even that side starts by having a lot of influence on the board, while part of the board doesn't care one way or the other, and that will be at the very least reduced. But again, overall, the opposition needs to hold on to what they have, and not a lot of it. It is the other side that needs to build from nothing, basically, from nothing or almost nothing, to have to build so much, which again is very important and thematic when you see how from 1848 to 1920, it was indeed such an incredible change that took a long time, but changed the landscape of American politics. And you will see this physically on the board as, of course, different components are placed there. So again, playing a board game with this topic gives you also that sensorial appreciation. And it's very real, it's very material, because I'm placing those tokens there when the amendment is ratified by a state. Is very powerful, as opposed to maybe, I don't know, seeing a blip on a screen, which again is one of the reasons why I like board games so much, and board games as a way to explore history, because I'm there, because it's so real, because it's such a visual connection as the historical elements are represented by physical components on the board. Votes for Women, it is a very tense, very sophisticated game. I would almost say, if you have no interest in the topic whatsoever, gameplay itself is very strong, with so many decisions, such tension, such interesting things going on all the time. If it was an abstract game just about, I don't know, squares and triangles, or just about different colors, gameplay would be strong enough. But then you have this level of gameplay attached to a topic which is so interesting and fascinating. So to me, what you have here is a truly great package and a truly remarkable game.